When delivering a professional score, whether for film, TV, or video games, Pro Tools is the industry standard. It's where everything comes together, the dialogue, sound effects, and music, before heading to the dub stage. Now, if your sequencing DAW isn't Pro Tools, that means you have to print all your stems and prep them for delivery. For many composers, they rely on offline bouncing, which is fast and efficient, but it also has its limitations, especially when it comes to real-time monitoring, visual feedback, session prep, etc. Now, live printing stems into Pro Tools isn't a new concept, but in the past, setting it up often required expensive hardware, complex routing, as well as extra troubleshooting, making it impractical for many composers. In this video, I'll show you a more modern and streamlined approach that will eliminate much of the hassle while maintaining all the benefits. For those of you who are new here, my name is Yuheng Yan. I'm a film composer based in LA, and I'm really excited to kick off my YouTube channel with this first tutorial, sharing some of the workflows that I found useful in my own projects. In this video, I'll walk you through a streamlined workflow for live printing stems from your sequencing DAW into Pro Tools, helping you catch mistakes in real time, eliminate extra session prep, and work more efficiently. So let's dive in. So to best illustrate the advantages of live printing stems into Pro Tools, let's first discuss the nature of offline bouncing, along with its pros and cons. Now, we're not going to discuss offline bouncing in its early troubled days, when it was plagued by instability. As of 2025, offline bouncing is a rock-solid procedure that has stood the test of time, with developers of all major DAWs continuously incorporating new features to enhance its flexibility and stability. One of its biggest advantages is that it is virtually free, as it comes built into the DAW, requiring no additional hardware or external processing. It is also incredibly time efficient, especially when dealing with longer cues, since audio files are not generated in real time. So with these benefits in mind, it's no wonder this method is widely adopted by working composers, especially among the younger generation. However, despite these advantages, offline bouncing has some significant downsides. First of all, the time-efficient nature of offline bouncing is really a double-edged sword, as it doesn't allow you to monitor your mix in real time. Now, of course, you can argue that offline bouncing is only initiated after you've checked and are happy with your mix, so real-time monitoring should be redundant. However, both human errors and plugin-related issues can be introduced before or during offline bouncing, potentially going unnoticed. This means you may have to rebounce problematic stems or your 2-mix, which is both time-consuming and prone to mistakes. Another issue tied to this is the lack of visual feedback to check for potential routing errors and plugin glitches during the rendering process. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, generally speaking, a cue consists of 2 types of tracks. Those that are part of your permanent template, like the orchestra that lives inside of your VEP template, or the project-specific tracks that change from cue to cue. For template tracks, any potential issues are likely ironed out over time, but for project-specific tracks, unless you're extremely diligent in checking their routings, mistakes are bound to happen. I mean, let's be real, when you're deep in a creative flow, the last thing on your mind is whether a track is routed to its corresponding stem. Maybe you've just come up with a great plugin chain to process the resampled string part. You're focused on the sound, not on whether the track is on the right stem bus. This can lead to 2 common issues. Either a track is routed directly to the final mix, meaning that element won't be printed to its corresponding stem, since the stem buses come before the final mix on the signal chain. So your stems won't match your final mix, and that is a cardinal sin. Another common scenario is that the track is routed to the wrong stem bus, meaning you either catch the mistake and have to reprint the stem, or worse, you don't catch it at all. And that's where things can get messy. I mean, imagine this, you accidentally printed a processed French horn part into the long string stem. Later on during the recording session, either you or the composer you work for decided to mute the brass stem so the players can hear themselves better. But no matter what the engineer does, the French horn part is still playing. Think about how confused everybody in the room would be, and the time wasted troubleshooting until everybody realized that, well, you just messed up the stem printing. Not a good look. If you were live printing though, there's a good chance that you'd immediately notice that something was wrong, because after working on a cue for hours, you instinctively know when each element enters and exits. If a French horn is supposed to start at bar 15, but you don't see any waveform on the brass stem track, you'd spot the issue instantly and stop to fix it. This also ties into another common courtesy related to visual feedback. Once you've locked in your stem layout for a project, you should always export the full layout, whether or not every bus has audio. This keeps things consistent and ensures that when someone opens your Pro Tools session, everything's properly prepared. That said, a good habit is to label any empty stem track with the word empty at the end of the name. This makes it clear to the recording or mixing engineer that the track is intentionally silent rather than the result of a mistake. Some engineers prefer to keep all the stems for a consistent layout, while others might want to clear out all the empty stems before mixing or recording. Either way, this gives them visual confirmation and flexibility so that they can work however they prefer. This is especially important because offline bouncing doesn't provide visual feedback the way live printing to Pro Tools does. When you bounce offline, you cannot immediately see which stems have audio and which are empty. If you're live printing though, you already have the waveform in front of you, making it easy to spot and label empty stems. Another major downside of offline bouncing is that the rendered stems are generally not in the final deliverable format. Whether you're delivering for a recording session or to the dub stage, 9 out of 10 times everything ultimately has to be assembled and prepared in Pro Tools. This means that even after bouncing stems offline, you still have to import and organize them in Pro Tools before making the final delivery. Now, this may not seem like a huge deal for a single cue, but when you're working on a feature film or a long format project with over 30 plus cues, this additional step quickly becomes a massive time sink and also introduces another opportunity for human errors. And that's where the advantages of live printing stems into Pro Tools become evident, as this workflow addresses all of the aforementioned drawbacks. But before we delve into the actual benefits, let's first take a look at how this workflow is set up. Live printing works by establishing two important pathways between your sequencing DAW and Pro Tools: synchronization and audio routing. For synchronization, there are a couple options to sync up two DAWs, but the most widely adopted method is via MTC, which is MIDI timecode. If your DAWs are running on separate computers, you will need a dedicated MIDI interface or an Ethernet MIDI device, such as the iConnectivity series, to transmit the MTC. Now, if your DAWs are running on the same computer and you're on a Mac, then it becomes significantly easier, as you can simply take advantage of Mac's built-in IAC bus for the purpose. So to use the IAC bus, first we have to make sure that devices online is checked within the audio MIDI setup. Once that's done, we've established the bus for transmitting MTC. Now we just need to configure our DAWs. Now, since our sequencing DAW is the master and Pro Tools is a slave, here's how to set it up. In your sequencing DAW, make sure that we're enabling MTC transmission and set it to send to the IAC bus. Moving over to Pro Tools, open up Peripherals, Synchronization, and set MTC reader port to IAC driver bus 1. In the next tab, Machine Control, make sure that MIDI Machine Control Master Enable is unchecked and MIDI Machine Control Remote Enable is checked. In Pro Tools Preferences, go to Synchronization and check both Machine Chases Memory Location as well as Machine Follows Edit Insertion. Once that's completed, hold Option Space to turn Pro Tools online, hit play in our sequencing DAW, and you'll see both DAWs are now synchronized. As previously mentioned, syncing up your sequencing DAW and Pro Tools is just one part of the equation. The other key component is routing audio between them. In the past, composers who wanted to set up audio routing for live printing had to invest in dedicated print rigs with expensive hardware that can handle the massive audio pipeline required to transfer their final mix, click track, as well as stems. Because let's be honest, setting up live printing with just the ability to print your final mix makes no sense. If you're going to implement this workflow, it has to allow you to print everything in one go. And there were two main approaches composers could take. First is to get a dedicated print rig. This meant investing in a separate computer, as well as MADI interface or the Pro Tools HDIO hardware that can manage the massive number of audio channels required. Another approach is to do everything on one computer. But this still requires getting audio hardware such as the Avid Matrix that can manage internal audio routing. On top of that, you might still need to get the Pro Tools HDX card or even a Digilink card, which can provide the necessary voice counts required for this workflow. In short, these setups were not only complex, but also expensive and difficult to troubleshoot. As a result, for many composers, this workflow simply wasn't practical. Only those willing to spend a lot of money to trade back time can afford to set up live printing this way.
For most composers, the complexity and cost simply outweigh the benefits. So, is there a way to circumvent all of the aforementioned drawbacks of setting off live printing so that we can still enjoy the benefit of this workflow, but without a hefty price tag? Well, it turns out there is, and the solution is a software called Omnibus made by Audio Movers. Now, this is not a sponsored mention, I just genuinely think it's a great tool. Omnibus is essentially a virtual patchboard that allows you to route audio both internally between applications and externally across different machines via NDI and AVB network protocols. Here are a few features that make Omnibus stand out. First is its massive channel count. Each Omnibus device can handle up to 256 channels. That's 128 stereo pairs or almost 43 groups of 5.1 channels if you work in surround. To put this into perspective, getting the same amount of voice count would require at least 4 Pro Tools HDX card, which could easily cost you up to 20 grand, which leads me into the next benefit of Omnibus, and that is how affordable it is. As of right now, Omnibus costs less than $200, and even better, it is not subscription-based. You buy it once and that's it. Third is its flexible snapshots for different projects. Omnibus allows you to store snapshots, makes it easy to quickly switch between different routing setups depending on the projects that you're working on. This is especially useful if you work across multiple templates and DAWs. The fourth one is how simple it is to set up and troubleshoot. Now, in my default stereo template, I have 25 pairs of stems, 2 mono click tracks, as well as a stereo pair for my final mix. So I need a total of 54 channels to transfer audio between my sequencing DAW and Pro Tools. Now, since Omnibus is a routing matrix, I will also need an extra stereo pair as my monitoring channel, which I will connect to my audio interface. Additionally, I will double patch my main click channel to my audio interface so that I can monitor the clicks in real time. Now, lastly, I will also connect the input and output of my audio interface to Omnibus so that I can record live into my DAW, while also have the ability to loop my audio interface's output back into my DAW when needed. And that wraps the setup of Omnibus. Now let's configure our DAWs. First, we have to set the playback device in both the sequencing DAW and Pro Tools to Omnibus so that they recognize its inputs and outputs. Next, we have to match the routing setup in each DAW to mirror Omnibus. And that's it, you're good to go. So with the DAW synchronization and audio routing handled, live printing becomes a more efficient and streamlined workflow, which brings us to its major advantages.
First of all, you can monitor the mix while printing. If you catch any issues, you can abort the printing process, fix the problem, and restart without wasting time rebouncing the stems after the fact. And if you've gone through the entire queue without stopping, then without a shadow of a doubt, you know the queue has printed correctly, because what you hear is what you get. Another huge advantage is, of course, visual feedback. It allows you to quickly and reliably spot empty stems, making it easy to batch rename them accordingly. On top of that, it provides an extra safety net to potentially spot mistakes caused by routing errors or plugin misfires. Now, of course, you should always double check your routings before printing, especially for project-specific tracks. But considering how often this process takes place at the 11th hour, when you're exhausted, mistakes can still slip through. Having that extra safety net can be a lifesaver. Another huge benefit is that there's little to no extra step required to prepare Pro Tools sessions, since everything is already printed in position. Here's how it works. Now, due to the nature of how MTC works, as well as the small latency introduced during printing, we need to complete a few quick steps to ensure everything lines up properly. Since MTC takes a brief moment to sync, we need to ensure that the cue is printed correctly from the start of the session by starting playback in our sequencing DAW 1 to 2 measures before bar 1. As a result, once printing is completed, we need to find the exact location of bar 1 in Pro Tools. To do so, go to bar 1 in your sequencing DAW, copy timecode and paste it into Pro Tools. Next, create a new marker at this location and label it accordingly. Now we need to correct the small amount of latency introduced during printing. First, locate the first transient of the bar 1 beat 1 click in Pro Tools. Press A to trim the beginning of the clip. Now we need to move the cursor to the marker we just created and control-click the clip group to snap it to the cursor position. Now that everything is properly aligned, ungroup the clip group to separate individual stems. Consolidate the clips by pressing Shift Option 3 so that their start time and length are updated. Press Shift-Control-R to batch rename the clips. To maintain a clean session, use the waveform as visual reference to select all empty stems. Batch rename them with the suffix empty, and press Shift-Command-R to ensure that the new names are applied to both the clips as well as the disk files. Then, Shift-Command-U to select all unused clips. Hit Shift-Command-B and Option-click Delete to delete all the unused clips from disk. Make sure that the color coding is completed if not done so already. And that's it, we're done. Another major benefit of this workflow worth mentioning is how easy it is to check for transition when two cues segues into each other. Traditionally, you would have to cut the ending of the previous cue's final mix and manually import it into the beginning of the next cue session to check for transition. However, when all of your cues are printed live and in position in Pro Tools, that entire extra step is redundant. Instead, you can simply go to the timecode of the previous cue's ending in your sequencing DAW, and since your sequencing DAW and Pro Tools are synchronized, simply hitting play would trigger Pro Tools to play back the previous cue at the desired location accurately. Lastly, because Pro Tools hosts the master timeline, including the picture, dialogue, sound effects, and temp score, live printing your cues directly in position in Pro Tools makes it much easier to generate QuickTime previews. It also eliminates the need to import the picture and all the production tracks into your sequencing DAW for every single cue, making that step completely redundant. By clearly separating the roles of your sequencing DAW and Pro Tools, asset management becomes much easier and more organized. And that's the full breakdown of live printing stems from your DAW into Pro Tools. This workflow has helped me save time, reduce errors, and keep my sessions organized. But of course, this is not the only way to do things. Offline bouncing is still a great option for many situations, but if you're looking for real-time monitoring, better visual feedback, and a smoother Pro Tools integration, then live printing can be a game changer. Let me know in the comments, do you already use live printing or do you prefer offline bouncing? I'd love to hear about your workflow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.